say you can make like 10 Khan Academies, right? Like now that this is decentralized, there are 10 times more like opportunities for like online education, right?
Hmm.
But then there's also one like Blacked Raw created, right?
Yeah.
So just because you created 10 useful things, you can also create one hyper addictive thing, and then all the kids just flock towards that, if that makes sense.
In New York, I'm Millie Rock.
All right. Welcome back to the Zoomers podcast, where last week we talked about the pros and cons of a 9 to 5 versus becoming an entrepreneur. We briefly kind of talked about decentralized jobs. So this week we brought on our first guest and resident crypto guy to talk about decentralized finance and the decentralization of the job market. Without further ado, here's Omid. Omid, why don't you introduce yourself to the people?
Oh, thank you guys for having me, first of all. Very much appreciate it. My name's Omid. I've been involved in the Web3 and crypto space loosely since 2016, and then was involved in the NFT space as a consumer. And then about 7 months ago, I launched my own project with one of my friends, and I've been working on that since then.
On that, can you actually talk about how your perspective shifted from originally being a consumer of NFTs to becoming a creator of NFTs? How did that kind of impact the way you thought about them?
Yeah, good question. So when I was a consumer, I got in about December of 2021. So that was after, like, it had been the media from, like, like all the high profile celebrities joining it to, like Bored Ape was making the news quite often. Just those projects were were being featured quite often. People, there's articles whenever you see like the Business Insider articles, it's like, what's an NFT? So that's when I started getting involved. And at first, I didn't really realize the value. I just thought of it as something to make money on, and that's definitely not a unique perspective. That's how a lot of people were thinking. Um, but as I got more involved, I was like, okay, like, buying and selling. Still up to that point, for me, was about like, I just saw it merely as like a transaction, and I, be like, okay, this, like, a cool artist made this one. I can make some money on this, or oh, this particular celebrity backed that one. When that was still a viable marketing method. But now shifting into the creator side, you see, like, one thing is how much bullshit uh, is in the space. Like, I can just tell you right now, like 98% of NFT projects are just not going to be a thing. There's a lot of, it's just the space is still over leveraged. And what I mean by that is, like, you can easily go pay a few $100s to get multiple promotions from someone in a third world country with, like, with a, a botted Twitter account, and yeah, you'll get followers. That's a way to build credibility, but it's still, like, it's still not there yet, and that's just one thing I've noticed. Like, as a consumer, you don't really think about from like the team side at all, but now, to become a successful project, like, you nearly, like, almost all the, like, really good projects I know has some sort of docs team where it's like, you have real people behind it, their resumes, what they've done before this. Um, celebrity endorsements still kind of work, but uh, there has to be, like, some sort of value being added. Like, paying, like, some Instagrammer for, like, a post, like, isn't really like what successful projects do anymore.
So I think a trend that you're getting at there, which is important to address, is that like if you think about like the origins of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, like the point is to remove the central authority that people feel makes it unfair for like the average person to participate in like the banking system, for example, or like the art market with NFTs, for example. But the thing is that that central authority also provided the value of ensuring legitimacy of projects, and like having social proof might not be enough. As we've seen, like if you just allow anyone to participate in the art market, then you'll get substandard, you know, projects, people just following greed to scam other people. the authority's kind of gone. So yeah, like, do you have, yeah, you mentioned like doxing yourself. Like how else can people tell if something is legitimate in the space?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to go about that. One, there are now like dedicated NFT projects whose sole purpose is to provide ratings, um, like review teams. Basically, there's like groups now. It doesn't have to be like an NFT project, where groups where projects are like pretty intensely reviewed. So that's one way to go about it, seeing if there's uh, people talking about them that aren't being paid, because you can pay people to talk about you either through like online articles, or you can pay some of these groups to mention you. So that should just be your first step. Next, learning how to do your own research, because if you don't know how to research, then the research itself won't really make a difference. But checking out things like, what I always do is I go through a Discord, Twitter, and website. And some things I look for is like, how much effort's being put in. It's pretty clear when people are putting more than like going above and beyond. It shows they have like some kind of vested interest. I look at the roadmap, seeing what the project is delivering, and I look at the team. And for me in this space now, if there's a team that is like a completely doxed, that's like almost a requirement. Like, where my team's partially doxed, a lot of projects I know are doxed. But like when you have someone's name and like not even going above and beyond, you can submit your documents to a third party. There's services that do this now because of how popular NFT space has gotten, where like, let's say I want to dox myself through a third party, I would submit them all my government documents, so like my driver's license, social security, address, bank statements. They would have everything about me, and they would hold it, and people would be able to go on there and be like, okay, this person is doxed through this service that I trust. They're like, now being held liable. I know who to come after if a promise that um, was given to the community by the team isn't delivered upon. There's some reprise. It might not be through a central authority, but in this day and age, knowing someone's background, you kind of just get exiled if blatantly scam and people know you. Uh, and then another thing that I like looking at is just seeing the buzz around them. Like, a good metric is people that will talk about your project without you giving them incentives, which can be hard to gauge. But just seeing who they're interacting with on Twitter. Are they going and do they have a strong community that comments under their posts? Is it like, so you can kind of gauge whether their interactions are real? It's pretty easy to tell the real ones from the fake ones, like the botted ones versus the genuine ones. Seeing who's mentioning them, and what collaborations they're doing. That's like been another trend is, if you aren't involved in collaborations, you're kind of falling behind. That's been like the newest way for projects to grow, is because you can think of like the pipeline of new people to the space has slowed down drastically, or you can even like consider it stopped. Like, there's no like new money flowing in realistically that wasn't in there before. So instead of competing for the same people, or trying to bring new people in through these collaborations, you bring in people from other communities, people who are already interested in the space. It's a much better marketing method. So every project is doing this. So if a project is not doing it, I'd be very suspicious of what their team's ultimate goal is. So that's just kind of my personal checklist that I use. Um, but yeah, there's more tools out there now. It's still not easy to find. But it's just you got to look at like a holistic picture. There's not one thing that I use.
So you kind
But
of mentioned the usage of Twitter in the NFT space for kind of the average Twitter user who's really not aware of, guess, of how Twitter plays into Web3. How is it like used as a tool nowadays?
yeah, so it's actually pretty incredible. Twitter is like almost perfectly tailored to the Web3 space. So if you want to think of it as like, the point of these social platforms was to like assist your reality, in the sense that like creators like like, you can think of it as like better grips for tools that already exist, right? But now it's becoming that it's entirely replacing those tools. So like, one example that I'll give is like, during the pandemic, companies shifted to Zoom, and many of them have kept it because they've realized how much more efficient it is. On Twitter, it's one step further. If you've ever been in a Twitter space before, some of the coolest like conversations that I've witnessed have happened through there. And basically just you have one project that like wants to start it, they host it, it's on their account, then you can bring in other co-hosts and you can bring in speakers, then people in the audience can, listen, give reacts, request to speak, tweet about the space and all that. And this has been, I'd say, like one of the biggest trends in the NFT spaces. Like a lot of you want to call alpha, like insider information about like what people think what products are going to do well happen through there. Discussions about cryptocurrency prizes happen through there. Giveaways happen through there, which is one of the biggest drivers in that. But that's how I meet a lot of the projects that I partner with, is through these Twitter spaces. Um, and then I use DM to message other projects, reach out to them, be like, hey, I really like what you guys are doing, let's hop on a call soon, maybe join our partnership program. And then it's like Twitter is also unique, in the sense that it's like really the only platform where it puts people as close to officials, accounts, businesses as close as you can get. Instagram's still a little separated, in my opinion. Twitter, you're right up in there. So it gives people a really cool way to interact with the projects they like. So like I have yet to, come across an NFT project that's not on Twitter, or like doesn't have one at least, just because it's so valuable as a tool. Like yeah, just especially the Twitter spaces, I'd say something very unique. Like those started getting more popular. I remember I did my first one in June, and that was when like people are realizing that, oh, this is like a really nice tool. Because before it'd be like celebrities hosting, like Jay-Z hosted a few, and it was more for like fun. These were like projects coming up, pitching, so the people in the community could hear, find out about these niche projects they wouldn't have known before, and also giveaways happening. Like MySpace regularly gives away 2 to 3,000 each time we go up. I know spaces that give away 10 to 30,000 each time you go up, and it's every single, multiple times a week, every single week. And if you aren't in the space, you wouldn't know about it. So that's like, I'd say like one of the bigger ways that I use Twitter to interact with other projects. Very unique tool.
Yeah, that sounds like it's very useful for you to run your project. But like as we were saying before, like do you think it's possible that this could open up, like if anyone can host one of these Twitter spaces with their project, and like anyone can join and learn about these things, like do you think that opens the door for some kind of exploits?
That's a good question. I'd say it can. One thing I will note about a Twitter space, so like if you want to use this as a metric to evaluate a project, this is how I do it. This is like my line of thinking. Um, in order to host one, you have to bring the other projects on board, and that in itself is kind of a pain to set up. You gotta reach out, and they want to have to come. And then you can look at the projects in the space, and one thing that is pretty noticeable is that big, like established projects that have credibility will very rarely go on a space for a project they don't somewhat trust. Um, Now, I will say, have I been invited to do spaces with projects that I'm not the biggest fan of? Yeah, 100%. I've turned down because I've turned down going in those spaces because I view it as tarnishing my reputation. Now, one thing that the people can do to kind of protect themselves is there are like specific NFT accounts that are known for hosting spaces, and that's how they built their credibility, is by hosting them so often and having high quality projects on. So look for those accounts more, and you can kind of tell by the participants in the space. Like if you're following a big project and they start one and there's not at least 20, 30 people in there, you should be a little worried. So that's a couple ways that I go about it.
Yeah, it
And
sounds like it sounds like what you're basically getting at is that like or at least implying, is that there's more responsibility like put on individuals and on these like small projects and businesses to ensure their own safety. Like,
100%.
so we put more responsibility on individuals. Like you see how the safety net is kind of gone, right? And I think maybe we can like move the discussion on to like broader topics, right? But like, do you think like in society, like it's a good idea, like where we are now, for people to take more responsibility for themselves, or do you think we need like more authority to help us out right now?
That's a loaded question. I'd say for me, it's hard to put a blanket statement on it. I'm a believer in individual freedom, personal responsibility. Basically, like the freer the man is, in my opinion, overall it's better. But however, I do realize that person, like these systems are set up to accommodate for the average person, in my opinion. Like the current systems we see today in like banking, credit cards, like like just cars, all this is like they kind of made it idiot proof. And that's for a very specific reason. Is so anyone can use the system, but if we take that away and decentralize, what you have is a pretty big separation of people who like understand exactly what to do and can educate themselves with the adequate resources they have, and people who don't. And that's either because they don't have the resources, they might just not understand, or they don't care. And I think that opens the door for more exploitation uh between those two different classes. Like so that's so I'm personally, I think it must be done cautiously, and I don't think we will ever get to a point where we're like, I think the last time humans were like fully decentralized was like when we were like, cavemen. And like even then, like society required centralization to grow to the rate of to the place we are now. It wouldn't have happened without central authorities and institutions that were guiding humans, things that are bigger, like ideas and structures that are bigger than us, that are bigger than any individual desire. Like one individual can't think or like uh, put those ideas on someone else. Like, and that's kind of how humans have been able to become masters of our environment. So when you're
Yeah.
decentralizing that, you're kind of unraveling all that, and I think it works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for also another large group of people, and I don't know if the world would benefit from unraveling that right now.
If we think about like, I don't know, if we go case by case down like things that are getting decentralized in society today, like there's tons of examples. Like I think crypto is just like exemplifies the trend of decentralization. Like we can take like Uber for example, which is like
Hmm.
basically decentralizing the concept of like transportation, like public
Yeah.
transport, right? We have like Khan Academy decentralizing education basically, or like Acorns and Robinhood, Fundrise, stuff like that, decentralizing the concept of like investing, right? And then there's freelancing websites too. So like, you know, a lot of these are good. I don't know, like if there's any like specific ones we want to discuss, like Dave, what specific decentralization are you like interested in or like have an opinion on?
Yeah, I was kind of curious to hear on Omid's perspective since we talked about it last week about the decentralization of the job market and how I kind of feel like moving forward, there's not necessarily like one way to have a successful career with like the amount of like online entrepreneurs becoming readily available nowadays. I was curious, kind of, Omid, how you think this trend will continue to progress, and if at a certain point even like a degree will be worth anything at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great question. Personally, I think decentralizing jobs is is a net positive. I do think there's downsides, but overall, I'm just speaking, from my perspective. Like, it's just, much better for me. Like, I like what I do now. It's a lot of fun. You kind of be, master your own schedule, uh, and all that. But I don't think we're going to get to that point at least anytime soon, or like my lifetime, because people still want convenience, and convenience comes at the cost of some kind of human capital or like innovation. Like there has to be human behind the convenience. Like even if it's like a drone dropping off your coffee, someone had to design that drone for like the company that makes it. So there's still going to be that requirement as long as humans want a convenient life, and the trends on that are only just further getting a little higher, especially post pandemic.
Right.
I do think a degree will still have value for a while, as long as colleges have endowments this big. They kind of are able to keep doing that. I don't think it's as necessary as it may have been 10 to 15 years ago, because there's a lot of certificates you can get online. There's a lot of you know stuff you can read, but that requires you to be a disciplined person. So like it doesn't work for everyone. I don't think. I think it'd be kind of foolish to go to someone who's struggling to find work and be like, just learn how to code and like build. Like you hear that all the time. And if that's just if everyone was meant to do it, then it wouldn't be a unique skill. Like not everyone's meant to do that. So I think it works good for some people, doesn't work good with others, which is why I don't think you can have like a fully decentralized job market. I think as long as like we want to continue like having Coca-Cola, if you want like a soft drink, you want to buy like any like consumer products, it's going to require a group of people being behind it.
Right.
But yeah.
Do we want to like transition into the premise of the decentralization of the art market? That was kind of something that we were briefly talking about earlier, was the concept of NFT thefts becoming a pretty prevalent issue in the space. And that's kind of a lot harder to find an appropriate workaround compared to physical pieces of art.
Yeah, it is still a pretty big issue. Just because, especially just like the nature of Web3 is like, in order to be in that space, you have to have a wall that interacts with, another website. And if, I've gotten scammed before, like I'll be the first, like I think almost everyone in the space has gotten scammed in some way. I've been scammed multiple times. It just happens. Because, it's kind of the Wild West still, in terms of like the rules. There's not, stories to go around yet. And now there's definitely some, but, like either from like fake links to connect that like drain your wallet, either through minting a bad NFT itself that, will drain your wallet. People not being smart with their seed phrases or their passwords for their wallets, and like people have gotten hacked by like you're not supposed to take a picture of it because your phone can get hacked and they can find it on your iCloud. You're supposed to write it down, but it's like small things like that that aren't commonplace yet, that it's very tough to combat this. And there's been attempts to like making different projects to that alleviate it, like either helping through victims. Like a lot of projects have like victim funds where the community will pool money together, but doesn't solve the issue. You just kind of like putting a band-aid on it. But yeah, I mean,
like I heard that like 20% of Bitcoin is in like lost wallets.
yeah, and that's like a very like I think I've lost a couple wallets, like a paper wallet that I had myself earlier. Like it just uh it happens, and that was like always going to be a thing. Whenever you have like so many new people move to a space that is like just born, the people that have been in it, that know how it works, a lot of information asymmetry, so it's very easy to exploit people. Like I've probably lost like over $3,000 to scams since I've been involved. It just happens.
Yeah, I want to touch on kind of something you said earlier where you mentioned that like, the premise of a lot of governmental laws when it comes to like loans or finance in general is to make it so it's, usable to the masses. And you kind of mentioned that there'll kind of be like a widening gap between the people that know what's going on in like the crypto world versus like the people that don't. Like for someone like myself who really isn't involved in it, I don't think I'll ever really get to a point where I'm like super involved enough to the point where I'll understand what's going on. Like, do you think that there'll be like avenues where it'll become more accessible in the future as it becomes more popularized?
Yes, I hope so. I think that's already starting to happen. So, like one problem with like any decentralized space is the information about it is also decentralized, which is pretty funny. So like there's definitely like you can read up on crypto, like there's plenty of resources about that online. But like a lot of what I've accrued in knowledge has been through experience, and I understand that everyone doesn't have that luxury. So just like being like seeing where the forefront of the activity is and going on there kind of gives you a good idea of how it's moving, but you have to understand the fundamentals first. Like if you don't understand why blockchain technology is powerful, then an NFT is still going to be kind of worthless to you just because like the foundation isn't there for why that technology is important. So you first have to like know the basics. So I think the avenues for that exist. If you want to get to a more advanced level, those things are definitely being put together, but it's not like you can just open a textbook about it. We're not at that point yet.
Right.
So it does require a much bigger initial time investment at the moment.
If you had to guess, like, of all the creators in the NFT space, like, what percentage of them have, like, a functional knowledge of what they're doing, and how many of them are just trying to grab at whatever works?
Ooh, good question. I'd say, okay, if we want to split up the time in like pre-crash and like post-crash, so like crypto was on like a decent bull run, as you may know. Then Luna had its famous collapse, 60 billion down to zero, and then Ethereum crashed a few times as it tumbled down after the situation in Ukraine. Um, some bad economic reports is all it took, and the NFT market went with it because they're all pretty tightly correlated. So before that happened, I'd say there was a lot of people who didn't know what they were doing. Um, it was like there was a point where setting up an NFT project like was a piece of cake. You go on Fiverr, you find an artist that would just basically make like a profile pic because those were like still pretty popular, like the Bored Ape copycats. You just find an artist that makes all those for you. You set up social medias, you pay for someone to promote your project, you mint out, and then you just take the money and run. That happened quite often. I'd say now people are a little wiser to that. It's not as easy to do that. I still do think there are, some projects that won't be around or shouldn't be around. But on just speaking on the creators that I have spoken to, so this is a pretty personal split. I'd say 60 to 70% have a pretty good understanding of how blockchain works. I think it just kind of goes hand in hand. If you care enough to start a project and put all this time into it, because it does require a lot of time, then you're probably pretty knowledgeable about what you're doing and you feel confident enough to undertake that activity. But there's still definitely people who don't know what they're doing. That's fine. I mean, they're not going to survive. The market will balance itself out eventually.
Do you think it's okay that these market fluctuations, like the kind of the volatility that comes with the establishment of this market, like is it okay that like random people who didn't know what they were doing kind of aped into it and just got completely like financially screwed by it?
No, I think that's quite unfortunate. And I'd put the blame on the people who were starting the projects because they were taking advantage of people. And like one important thing to note about like an NFT, right? When you connect your wallet to the site and you mint it, at that point you're pretty much, you know, you're basically saying I agree to get this art or whatever this is. But when the team starts making promises, like a lot of the projects we're doing, and they don't uphold it, that's when you get into tricky territory because there's been a few people that have gotten arrested by the government, the SEC, FBI. Like Frosty's NFT was a pretty well-known one that rug pulled, and the guy made a few $1,000,000 and got arrested a couple months later for all this. And the precedents aren't there yet, but they will be very soon. But yeah, I mean, I feel really bad for anyone who lost a lot of money buying into something they were either completely misinformed about or just blatantly lied to. But I do think the government is catching up.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
good that they crack down on it. I think they're also trying to sue Martin Shkreli. Didn't he like do somewhat of a rug pull like last month or something? Do you know about that?
yeah, I saw on his social, I think it was Instagram, he posted something about like this pharma NFT, and I just didn't really look into it any further. But I saw some people in his comments complaining. But man, I don't know if him of all people to do that is like pretty funny. Like he like is pretty active on his Instagram. So I don't know why like he wouldn't be able to get away with, like he's on house arrest. Like, one little slip up and he's back in.
Right, right. Because he's a very public figure. Like, the value
Yeah,
of his project would depend on his reputation.
exactly.
Like you were
Exactly.
saying before, like the one of the mechanisms to prevent fraud is like this social accountability, right? Like the mob accountability. And yeah, like I think it's easier when you're anonymous. But yeah, now if like the level of trust is only built with people that are like there's like a face to the project, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's overall good. Like, for my project, me and my partner, we're both doxxed on our website. Our names are out there, our social media's out there, LinkedIn's are out there, and it's fine with that because I'm trying to build something valuable. I have nothing to hide. But like nowadays, you do have to have at least like people on your team that are doxxed. Like my whole team isn't because I have people, who they aren't like making like really important decisions in the sense like Henry and I are running through everything. So there's not really like a point of them getting doxxed. But if you have like the important people that are doxxed, that's like really good. And then if you can like Google them and they've done other things before, that's even better. That's like what you want. You want someone who's bringing their experience and what they've done in Web 2 and delivering on a value add project in Web 3.
Yeah, so like it's kind of becoming a blend of you need some like authority, accountability, right? Like some kind of proof rather than just a
Yeah,
completely anonymous, like decentralized marketplace, which like is probably not possible. Um,
yeah,
but
100%.
yeah, if you want to move into like discussing another specific example of decentralization, I think maybe we could talk about like I mentioned before, Khan Academy, kind of like online learning basically decentralizes learning and education, right? But like I would argue that that hasn't made the average person any smarter or better at school. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do agree with that argument. Uh, I think what it did was it took people who were already going to be good at school for the most part and gave them more tools to get even better. Like
Right. So
just
it kind
just
of
from yeah,
increases quality in a way.
yeah, I think so. Like just from personally, the people that I've seen use or mention Khan Academy versus the people that I recommended that it would actually be like a bigger help to. Like some of my friends are like, hey, I know you're struggling with math. This is a really good resource to get better. Like it's helped me a lot. Almost none of them went through and used it, but every single person that I knew used Khan Academy on a regular basis was already a pretty decent student. They were good at books, academia, so they just used it to get better. So yeah, I don't think Khan Academy was like greatly like brought up the meeting. I think it just made the top like 20-25% even that much better.
Yeah. Dave, do you concur with that? because I don't think that's like a commonly held most people would say like Khan Academy is like helping people learn. But what do you think?
Yeah, I guess when you guys kind of mention it that way, it makes sense that the people that utilize like online resources, because at that point it's basically all on you to figure out like if you actually want to learn
Right.
more, then
Right.
really, yeah, it does just benefit the people that have already been like excelling because they already have that inherent like workflow and ability to learn, and the people that are struggling, unless they get further external motivation, I don't see why they would look towards online resources either. It's like, yeah, I mean, school to a certain extent is forced, but if you just use online education, then it's all basically like because you want to learn. Um,
I'm trying to say, dude, I'm trying to, people want that freedom until they have to like take on the responsibility. Like
right.
I didn't want to like, like I didn't want to push back again because I respect Omid's NFT project. Like it's definitely legit, but like just in general with this decentralization thing, I think like giving people all these like options and like giving like that's what they want, but it's not like, you know, I think it's increasing inequality in like a lot of areas.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. As someone who's in the space, I just think in general, most people would benefit from having more structure in their lives, not less.
Hmm.
And I
Right.
think we're
And like what
starting to,
we were the
yeah,
last episode we were or I think it was the first episode we were talking about how like it's kind of like glamorized like oh can everyone be a online business slash influencer slash freelancer like whatever like answers like probably no, right? But like
Uh,
I think it's a popular perception that like literally everyone can like do TikTok or whatever. I don't think that's a good idea. But yeah, I mean you did mention like not it's not a yeah. I think we're in agreement. Like it's not a good idea for everyone to go ahead and jump in and try to buy NFTs. But
yeah. What would you say for someone that does want to get into the space? Like, what is the correct mentality to have moving forward?
to get into the NFT space.
Yeah, we'll say.
Um, First, do some heavy education. I'd say just watch some YouTube videos. Um, if you're like a book type person where you just want to like study, the cryptocurrency like certification consortium, I think that's what it's called, has like you can get like certified by taking like a test on like Bitcoin or Ethereum. Don't need to take the test. Just download their study guide and just go through the topics yourself. And that's the topics provide like a really good starting point of understanding the basics of what is a blockchain, why is Ethereum unique, why is Bitcoin unique, that stuff. And then I just try to slowly start reading some articles. It can be very overwhelming at times because it it changes so quickly, like the space and it's how it's moving. So that part can be like pretty exhausting. So I'd say honestly, it's just like good to remember like everyone's not like in the space is going through like the same thing. So you don't need to like feel overwhelmed if you can't learn anything like in 1 week because there's a lot of information out there. But I'd say like YouTubers, different articles, maybe even reading like some white papers about like some like good projects, like starting with like the most well-known ones, like why is Bored Ape worth so much? You can read online about why it's worth so much, and that will kind of help you work your way down.
I think the point is there's no like it's not a get rich quick scheme,
Right.
which is like what people kind of think
Ye-
like a lot of things. And I think that it's just like a timeless strategy to who the first one I remember is like Tai Lopez, right? Like he'll have these like ads on YouTube of him just like showing off his like houses, his like fancy cars, just millions of dollars worth of stuff, right?
yeah, new
And the whole
Lamborghini.
Here in my garage with my new
yeah,
Lamborghini.
exactly. Yeah, everyone knows that. Yeah, and the whole point is to get you um to buy something from him that will allow you to get what he has. Like, he's showing all this stuff off. and implying that you can get this too if you just invest a little bit of money into his program. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of just it just keeps happening like, and I think the only way to stop stuff like that is like to make it like illegal. Like
Yeah.
it's going in the opposite direction. Like basically this is like becoming more and more like allowed. Like there's that I can go through my YouTube, right? There's thousands of YouTubers saying like this coin will 10x, like this online business will like make you a millionaire. Like
Internet gurus, right?
right. And it's like, well, it's tough to say like, oh, like you shouldn't even be allowed to like make videos like that. Like that's kind of extreme because like then people will say, oh, the government's like trying to prevent people from like becoming successful. Like if that makes sense.
Right.
So yeah, like what do you think the line is for like an internet guru, for example?
That is like a pretty good point. I'd say that there's definitely still people who are trying to, scam and stuff in the space. I do think the government is catching up quicker than people are willing to admit. Because at a basic level, if you give a promise, um, basically like, securities law and like wire fraud, like that hasn't changed. And they can very easily look, and if you go and you promise someone something, even if you put like this is not financial advice, like if you promise something to someone and you sell them an object based on that promise where the value of the object is only derived from that promise, then you are still breaking the law. Now, I think that just takes some time for them to catch up, and that's just the way the government's always worked. It's never proactive, it's always reactive. So unfortunately, I think more people are going to get scammed. There's going to be more bigger scams before the groundwork for this is kind of set. Um, I'd say it's just like the same days as like the same thing as like when new financial instruments are introduced, or like the beginning of the internet, like the people like the rules that are going to be put in place have to be broken before they're put in place, if that makes sense. You have to see what people are doing before you make new rules.
Yeah, I mean, all change starts from like some kind of some kind of war or crisis or something. Like that's really when some change is enacted. So yeah, I think we're going through that right now.
Yeah, I agree.
So what can we like? So as a just like as a person, a Zoomer trying to navigate the world of like temptation, get rich quick stuff. Like what's some like practical uh advice? Like what should you consider before you convince yourself that you can start whatever online business?
And to add on that, like for you, as for you, it's not the get rich quick scheme that keeps you in the NFT space, but what keeps you motivated to kind of stay in that area?
Yeah, okay, great questions. So one, I do like what I'm doing. Like the space is really cool, and I just like enjoy being at like the front of new activity, new innovation. I enjoy that work the most. Like in the past, I've worked for an artificial intelligence company, and I was doing market research, and that was really cool because I was basically seeing like, okay, this is what the top AI companies are doing, and this is like what they have planned, and kind of just you realize that no one's hip to like what's going on. If you're not involved, you won't know what's going on. So that's probably the biggest reason why I enjoy it, and also it's like it's fun. Like I get a there's more responsibility on my hands, but like I enjoy that. It's more satisfying that way. Um, Advice to people who want to get involved. Uh, I'd say, well, first of all, I don't think everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur, uh, and you might have to find out for yourself if that's the case for you. Um, I feel like most people kind of know though if they are like, um,
That's
just
a
in like
good point. There's like an internal like if you talk to some like anyone who's like anyone who is like vigorously doing something despite like people telling them like not to do it or just like a general like consensus is like not a good idea, but they're gonna do it anyways, like I think that's almost a requirement to make it
yeah,
in unregulated competitive fields where there's like
yeah,
a huge
100%.
payout if you really make it, you know? Like you need that
Hmm.
obsession.
No, I agree, and which is why I think like I don't think everyone's made to do it, which is fine. I'm not. It's not a bad thing, but it's just not for everyone. And I think with like social media, like I feel like a lot of people, see people like, 'cause I'm 22, like see kids my age, maybe a little older, or younger, who are, driving around like these cars, like flaunting all this cash in clubs, like basically living a successful life. And I think now more than ever, people feel bad about themselves if they haven't reached that high level of success, and they see people the same age as them doing that. And I think that's one of the negative impacts of social media. Just distorts reality. I mean, that's like another discussion, but like, yeah, it's just sad to see that because like a lot of those are like pretty fake. Like people get exposed all the time for you know propping up an image on social media and trying to sell something behind it. But if you do think you're like an entrepreneurial type, you first got to like find out like it's like best when your interests and what you can offer value in align. I think that's when you like that's like the sweet spot is like not only do you like passionately enjoy what you're building, but you're also good at it. Not everyone is able to align it, but if you have something like that, then I would highly recommend you just try it out. Like you have nothing to lose, and you should be, honestly expecting to not make it. Most businesses fail, just the fact of life, and you're definitely gonna fail a few times before you get to where you are. Like I've had ideas that I've had not work out, but it's fine. Like you just have to take it on the chin and see what you learned, and then move on. But yeah, if anyone wants to like be like like a digital nomad or work online, I think it starts with like a very thorough self-assessment, seeing if that's really for you, and not looking at it as a way to get rich, but looking at it as how can I offer the most value to other people, but also add value in my own life because this is what's best for me. So two-pronged question you got to start with.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of entrepreneurs that like what happened to them was basically they tried to do some kind of like corporate thing and they just like couldn't stand it. Like I feel like that's like a origin story for like tons of, if you read like The Millionaire Fastlane, like that guy. He was uh he was driving limos for like some kind of car service and like that was his job. And yeah, he just couldn't stand it. Um Gary V, kind of started working in that
Yeah.
wine shop with his dad. That one might be a little different, but I like that actually might be the advice. Like, go try like the opposite thing. Like, if you're unsure, right? Because
Yeah.
there's some people that are sure, and there's nothing you would say to them that would like change their mind, right? But there's people on the fence. I guess that's who we're talking to. So yeah,
Ye-
for them,
no,
like
I agree.
you might want to try the other thing first
Yeah,
because
and one thing that oh, sorry, are you good?
yeah, yeah.
I was just gonna say like one thing that's like interesting to think about. If you just want to look at it from like a higher ability point, it's easier to go from big to small than from small to big.
Hmm.
And if you're super young, you really have nothing to lose by just like going, go corporate, go work for someone. It's like a great way to get exposure. And honestly, there's like industries where it's, you know, even if you're an entrepreneur, you should still work. And I think like one of that would be, uh, you know, some sectors of real estate. I remember I had one of like the best real estate academics in the country. He teaches at Wharton, Peter Linneman. He actually wrote the textbook that we were reading. And he came, and every class there was this kid who would ask the same question to all of our speakers, and he'd say, what would you say to someone that was in our age group who had maybe enough money to buy a small property, get a down payment on it? How would you go about it? And his immediate response was, don't do it. It's not worth it right now. Because his point was, when you're starting anything, you're going to make mistakes. That is just how it works. And when you have worked in the corporate world, you will see these mistakes in action and can just prevent stupid ones from happening. Also, a mistake when you're 22 and you've put your entire, net worth, your entire life, like all your energy into something and it doesn't work, you are inflicted a much bigger loss than if you were to like work corporate for a few years, come out at 28, 29, start something. At least you have, some kind of money saved up, you have experience, and you have connections. You build a network. That's why a lot of the people, like you were saying, a lot of the entrepreneurs who are really successful worked corporate. Part of that is, you meet really successful people who will, refer you to other people who could, make a massive deal for your company, or people who want to invest. Finding, institutional money by knowing, by having that strong network. So yeah, I fully agree with that. Like, if you aren't like born to do it, even if you think you are, like working, at least like trying it out, like you really have nothing to lose, in my opinion.
Dave, what do you think as the the corporate half of this pod?
Or we can cut this out. But sorry, what exactly was the question again?
He's saying like if you want to be an entrepreneur, or like we were saying that like if you want to be an entrepreneur, but you're not sure, a good idea is to like try out the corporate thing first, because it's like you can meet, like you can get capital and like connections there, and like it's less of a risk than trying to enter corporate after you fail in a
Right.
business. What do you think
Yeah.
of that?
I think I agree for the most part. I can't really speak to the behalf of, the more entrepreneurial side of things, because honestly, this podcast will be probably like my first step into the realm. But I do think that what's
You're
up?
going crazy, Dave.
Going crazy.
First step, bro. This 20 steps right here.
Um,
It's like
yeah.
a move. This like that step that Neil Armstrong took. So
Dude,
random.
ours is bigger. What are you talking
They're
about?
crazy.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily for the same reasons of what Omid said, but I do think that I won't necessarily look back at my time working in the corporate world as like a bad thing, because yeah, it is something that, to an extent does receive like a lot of flack when you do compare it to like your entrepreneurial businesses, just because, like we mentioned, the online self-made millionaire is so glorified nowadays. But like I've learned to appreciate some of the benefits that do come with working like a corporate job, like namely, the distinct time where you're off work, and then yeah, the connections that you're able to make, and the soft skills you're able to develop by being in the workplace. So yeah, I think, having the opportunity to exercise both, and I think, yeah, realistically that working in a corporate job first and then transitioning to more of like an online space would make more sense, because I would agree that it's probably a little bit more difficult to re-enter corporate America if you don't really have any prior work experience. So yeah, if you have the opportunity to try out both, I definitely would recommend it and see, which one works for you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
fully
I
agree.
have heard that like people, like entrepreneurs say that like when you're young, it's like the best time to do it though, because you don't have like any responsibility. Like you don't have like a family or like a mortgage payment to like worry about. So at that point, you're kind of like, even if you wanted to, right? Like you're kind of stuck if you have like bills to pay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's valid too.
That is a very interesting point, Ian. And that's why I think why people are starting to lean towards doing it younger. But I will add that, our generation at least is going to live longer than our parents, just the way it is. And, the way that's going to be spread out is, you're going to have a few extra years in like your teens, a few extra years in your 20s, a few extra years in your 30s. And that's how, like, I think people perceive it as just like each decade of your life will be longer. I don't know, that's wrong, but like, that's how I think it's a good way to visualize it. So, I think we are being afforded more time. And like, really, again, like I think you'll know pretty quickly if corporate is just absolutely not for you. You'll just know it by, trying it out for a bit. And you have nothing to lose over working for like 1, 2, even like 3 years and then being like, okay, I can do something else now. I'm ready for that. Or I learned that this is not for me. So I don't think people should feel rushed because, especially people our age are going to have more time to do it. But there's no point dilly-dallying because, your 20s are a pretty valuable time to build your career.
Yeah, and to add on that, I think, well, what we were saying before is kind of like glorified or like encouraged to see how all these people just like, being successful and like shitting on like having a job. But if you really think about it, like it's not like people. I think the thing is that people aren't deciding between like working corporate and like working on their business, right? I think they're deciding between working on their business, working in corporate, and like goofing off. I think like goofing off is like 70% of like where everyone's like energy kind of goes. Like, because we're talking about people who are like in college, like right? Like they have all the opportunity and time, perceivably to begin their like online hustle, right?
Yeah.
That's what you would say, right? But like, I think the reason they're not doing that is because they're goofing off.
No, I agree. I think people don't realize how unproductive uh, they can be, especially if you just look at your screen time. I think most people's screen times is a full-time job,
Yeah, I'll agree to that.
which
If
is
you have,
crazy to think about. Yeah. I
I
mean, I'm the
say,
same way. I'm on my phone a lot. I mean, a lot of it is for work. Um, but I try to put limits on apps that I'm not directly using uh do any of my projects. But it's pretty crazy if you like unfettered phone access. Honestly, not a vibe. you just you it's like a full-time job, but you're honestly just like degrading yourself by doing that. Like it's bad for your attention span. It's bad for your eyes. You're not progressing. You're just watching you know fed content to you. Um, so yeah,
Exactly.
I kind of I agree with that. On I think people aren't like, but I do think having you want to call it goof off time. That's what you called it. I'll call it that. I think having goof off time is important. I think when I look back at like my most memorable moments in life, it's like times where I'm just like having a ball with friends, and I don't really like. Sure, there are like some specific nights where like you make a breakthrough or something exciting happens, but like
Yeah. Well,
you
I
definitely want to give your
separate that though. I separate like a social experience from like watching videos like right before you go to sleep and like jerking off and like eating like dog food. Like if that's what I would classify as like
okay.
self-destructive.
like more
Like
like
Okay,
instant
mind.
okay. So,
gratification. Yeah.
okay. What would you classify going to like a club with your friends or going drinking with your friends?
Depend like if you do that all the time, then it's not like a special social thing. So I'd say that's like depending on your lifestyle, if that's probably destructive.
Okay, no, that makes sense, and I do agree. Most people live a pretty toxic life day to day, and the information's out there, but it's not really being pushed. And I think people are willing to sacrifice their mind, body, and spirit because of convenience or gratification.
Yeah. maybe I'll change my answer. Clubbing with friends, I think that's like a tier above just like the solo aspect of it is what makes it so demoralizing to see people just like they're basically the way I describe it is like you're just like fast forwarding through your life, if that makes sense. Like you're just trying to kill time, you know? And that's kind of what happens when you're faced with these options. Like one option is just like sugar coated and like filled with cocaine, and then like the healthy, who's gonna pick broccoli over like, you know, McDonald's? Like it's pretty hard to just sit there when you see like ads streamed into your brain for McDonald's and like consciously be like, I'ma eat broccoli. Like I think you have to remove your from things like that.
Yeah, you either have to remove yourself like physically or educate yourself um enough to, be a conscious consumer. And that's like in every aspect of the word, like
Yeah.
consuming content, consuming music, like entertainment, food, um, like technology, like all that stuff. Like what you consume, knowing how that impacts your brain and body is really important because I promise you, as soon as you do like a little bit of research into like the average person's like day to day, like it's pretty disgusting. I'm gonna be honest, frankly, especially in the US, how people live. It's very disgusting. And I do think there are outside forces, or you want to call it inside for like there's forces in the country that won't benefit from people changing these habits, or even might benefit from them staying the same or getting worse. So they're not going to promote the alternative.
Yo,
As long as like
now we're getting into it, yo.
as long
Yeah,
as like
yeah, yeah.
the
Yo,
quote is getting
what are
hit.
these forces? What are these forces? Who,
I don't know. I think
who would
like corporate
who would
interests.
benefit?
Hey, yo.
Yo, wait, one thing. Like what this is so related to the decentralization you're talking about. Okay, so given the freedom that like anyone can make content that like helps people, okay? Like let's take that freedom, right? Let's consider the pros and cons of that. Say you can make like 10 Khan Academies, right? Like now that this is decentralized, there are 10 times more like opportunities for like online education, right?
Hmm.
But then there's also one like Blacked Raw created, right?
Yeah.
So just because you created 10 useful things, you can also create one hyper addictive thing, and then all the kids just flock towards that, if that makes sense. It's like you freeing up the decentralizing and like allowing for this freedom. Like you created 10 good things and one bad thing, but there's no regulation on porn is free, right? Like these bad things can just be like completely free, completely promoted without consequence. You can just flock all the demand because it's way harder to make something healthy and good seem appealing, right? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of like built into nature. Like vegetables taste worse than like sugar.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's why you have to, in my opinion, everyone should have boundaries in place. So if you want to think about it from the point of restricting freedoms that you may have, but are objectively not good for you. And if you restrict those freedoms for yourself, it liberates freedoms elsewhere, creative freedom, you know, not being bound by any addictions. So, yeah, I think people's perception of freedom is pretty fucked up. And with like decentralization, just kind of, you know, is able to utilize that to, identify everyone's weak points and capitalize on it.
Mm.
So I think people first have to educate themselves or even care enough, just knowing, um, and restricting their personal freedoms in order to experience, like in my opinion, greater freedoms, because you can't really call it objective. I mean, but I do think it is greater freedoms elsewhere in your life. That's just like that's like my thinking when undertaking a new task or goal, is what freedoms do I first take away from myself so I can achieve this in the best way possible.
Right. You ever hear of like Jocko Willink's expressions like discipline equals freedom? That's kind of his motto.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that. Obviously, it is very like self-dependent, but like if you indulge at every moment possible, you're just gonna fry your brain, and like, it doesn't even have to be anything you can like you put physically in your body. Like consuming garbage content or garbage music is, it's not good for you. Uh, any garbage media or hanging out with like garbage people, like it just brings you down, and unfortunately, it's been normalized enough where people don't recognize that it's garbage anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole nother discussion for another time that we can talk about, but I think we're running up on time here. So, Omid, thank you so much for joining us on the pod, on the Zoomers podcast. Really appreciate
Yeah,
all your input. And you have
thank you for
anything you want to
having
add
me.
to that?
Yes, sir. Every week, baby. We're gonna have new guests. Yeah. New guests every pod for
The
the
idea.
for the for the foreseeable, for the
Well,
foreseeable future. We got a good lineup.
yeah.
Appreciate Omid coming out,
Omid, you
informing the
wanna
masses,
you wanna plug anything?
letting them know the truth. Yeah. We got
Plug your
you got
socials,
anything
your
to plug?
projects, or anything?
Yeah, guys, if you want to check out the work that I'm doing, check Bullets Club NFT on Twitter, just at Bullets NFT. Check our website. You can check out some of the work that I've done before. All my socials are linked to the project. So, just come in, say hi. We'd love to see you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.